Monsieur le Commissaire, vous avez la parole.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, human rights, all human rights, are the solid foundations of flourishing societies. They are the bonds of trust between people and their governments. They are a beacon of hope in the search for a better world that rejects violent conflict, brutality, and injustice. They help overcome trauma and division and are the antidote to exceptionalism, supremacy, and contempt for the other. Human rights provide a compass to steer us through challenges of our time, from the climate crisis to technological developments. And yet, disturbing trends that undercut our rights are gaining ground across the world. Pro-war propaganda is everywhere, from military parades to ramped-up rhetoric. Sadly, there are no peace parades or ministries of peace. The glorification of violence is coupled with a troubling erosion of international law. This law is the foundation of peace, our global order, and our daily lives, from trade rules to the global internet to our fundamental rights. But several governments are disregarding, disrespecting, and disengaging from it. When states ignore violations of the law, they become normalized. And when states apply the law inconsistently, they undermine the legal order everywhere. It is time for states to wake up and to act. Around the world, the long-established rules of war are being shredded, with virtually no accountability. Russia's war in Ukraine has turned even more deadly. In July, more civilians were killed and injured than in any month since May 2022, as the Russian Federation intensified attacks along the front line and on cities across the country. Recent weeks have witnessed some of the most massive airstrikes since the war began, with countrywide drone and missile saturation attacks resuming and intensifying. Deliberate attacks on civilian energy systems and other infrastructure that is essential to civilian life are grave violations of international law. Ukrainian prisoners of war and civilians who are arbitrarily detained are subjected to widespread and systematic torture and ill treatment. In areas under occupation, the Russian Federation is imposing its own legal and governance systems, preventing Ukrainians from freely expressing their opinions and restricting their movement. My staff on the ground are working to document these violations together with those committed by Ukraine. Negotiations to stop the fighting need to focus on immediate steps to protect civilians and safeguard the rights of people in occupied territory, as well as end torture and ill treatment. Lasting peace can only come with full respect for international law. In Sudan, both the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese armed forces continue to show an utter disregard for international humanitarian and human rights law. Thousands of civilians have been killed this year, and hostilities are intensifying in Darfur and Kordofan. Both sides target health facilities, markets, and water plants. The scale of the suffering of the Sudanese people across this vast country is unfathomable, demanding the full attention of the world. After more than a year under RSF siege, the situation in Al-Fashir is catastrophic. People are struggling to find food, water, and medical supplies under constant bombardments. Sexual violence is widespread, predominantly against displaced women and girls. There are no safe routes out of the city, and I have repeatedly raised the risk of further atrocities and ethnically motivated violence. We urgently need decisive action to prevent further atrocity crimes. All countries need to respect the Security Council's arms embargo, pressure the parties to protect civilians, ensure full humanitarian access, and urgently resume dialogue on a ceasefire, on an end to the conflict and return to civilian rule. The people of Myanmar are caught up in a harrowing human rights calamity 4 years since the coup. The military targets civilians in their homes, villages, schools and camps with aerial attacks and bombardments. Arbitrary arrests, torture, sexual violence and forced recruitment. In Rakhine State, the Arakan army is subjecting people to many of the same crimes. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, there is damning evidence of continued grave violations and abuses by all parties to the conflict. And I will provide full updates on Myanmar and the DRC today and tomorrow. Excellencies, Israel's mass killing of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, its infliction of indescribable suffering and wholesale destruction, its hindering of sufficient life-saving aid, and the ensuing starvation of civilians, its killing of journalists, UN staff and NGO workers, and its commission of war crime upon war crime are shocking the conscience of the world. I am horrified by the open use of genocidal rhetoric and the disgraceful dehumanization of Palestinians by senior Israeli officials. The region is crying out for peace. Gaza is a graveyard. Israel remains in deep trauma after the horrific attacks by Hamas and other armed groups on 7 October, and the continued holding of hostages. Further militarization, occupation, annexation, and oppression will only feed more violence, retribution, and terror. Israel has a legal obligation to take the steps ordered by the International Court of Justice to prevent acts of genocide, punish incitement to genocide, and ensure enough aid reaches Palestinians in Gaza. My office's monitoring and reporting are an important contribution to future accountability. Israel has a case to answer before the International Court of Justice, and the evidence continues to mount. But we need action now to end the carnage. The international community is failing its duty. We are failing the people of Gaza. Where are the decisive steps to prevent genocide? Why are countries not doing more to avert atrocity crimes? Inaction is not an option. They must stop the flow to Israel of arms that risk violating the laws of war. They must apply maximum pressure for a ceasefire, the release of all hostages and those arbitrarily detained, as well as the entry of sufficient humanitarian aid into Gaza through all the means at their disposal. They must take decisive action to oppose Israel's planned military takeover of Gaza and its accelerating annexation of the occupied West Bank. I also urge their backing for the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people. Excellencies, the retreat by some states from multilateral frameworks, institutions, and international agreements is another troubling trend. I'm profoundly disturbed by the arrest warrants issued by the Russian Federation and sanctions imposed by the United States on judges and prosecutors of the International Criminal Court. The US sanctions against the Special Rapporteur appointed by this Council need to be reversed. The illegal detention of our staff in Yemen is a direct attack on the UN system. They must be released immediately and unconditionally. The decisions by Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland to leave the Ottawa Treaty on landmines weakens its protection for everyone. The United States' withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and from global bodies, including this Council, and the Universal Periodic Review process is deeply regrettable. I'm also concerned by the new trend of disparaging the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development agreed by all countries 10 years ago. Some states are also reducing their regional engagement. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have left the economic community of West African states. Venezuela has declared its intention to withdraw from the jurisdiction of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. The Russian Federation has left the European Convention on Human Rights. Gradually, the web of global and regional cooperation, carefully crafted over decades for the common good, is being weakened. Some states are becoming the extension of their rulers' personal power. Global and regional frameworks are far from perfect, but states need to strengthen and reform them, not unravel them. We cannot return to the outdated thinking and approaches that led to 2 world wars and the Holocaust. Monsieur le Président, alors que les crises s'éternisent et que le droit international s'érode, le progrès dans les droits humains stagne et va même en arrière. La transition en Syrie reste fragile. Je suis profondément préoccupé par la récente recrudescence de la violence à Ceuta, les rapports de graves abus de droits humains et les divisions sectaires persistantes. J'exhorte le gouvernement à prioriser la protection de toutes les communautés et de poursuivre ses efforts pour établir la responsabilité pour les violations et abus passés et actuels. Notre personnel à Damas est prêt à apporter son soutien. Haïti s'enfonce dans le chaos, au milieu d'une violence endémique des gangs. Et je vous donnerai plus de détails plus tard dans cette session. Au Nigeria, la violence s'est fortement intensifiée. Les affrontements entre communautés sont aggravés par les massacres et les déplacements massifs causés par Boko Haram et d'autres groupes armés. Je suis préoccupé par les allégations persistantes de violations graves commises par les forces de sécurité dans le cadre d'opérations antiterroristes, en dépit des promesses du gouvernement de garantir la responsabilité. Malgré la tendance mondiale vers l'abolition de la peine de mort, il y a une augmentation alarmante des exécutions dans certains États. En Iran, plus de 840 personnes auraient été exécutées depuis le début de l'année, soit plus du double du nombre enregistré durant la même période l'année dernière. L'Arabie saoudite a exécuté au moins 260 personnes cette année. En Chine, il n'existe pas de chiffres vérifiables sur les exécutions et je continue à exhorter la transparence et la réforme, y compris un moratoire et l'abolition. En même temps, certains États ignorent complètement le droit international des droits humains ou en choisissent certains à respecter, comme si nos droits étaient un menu à la carte. Notre dernier rapport sur la République populaire démocratique du Corée montre clairement que l'ensemble de la population subit une répression brutale et vit dans la peur. Je vous en parlerai plus en détail plus tard dans cette session. Dans le Sahel, au Burkina Faso, au Mali et au Niger, les autorités militaires répriment l'espace civique et procèdent à des arrestations arbitraires, des détentions, des recrutements forcés et la censure des voix dissidentes dans le cadre de leur réponse hautement militarisée à l'extrémisme armé. Les ONG ont été suspendues, les partis politiques bannis et de nouvelles lois draconiennes introduites pour restreindre la liberté des médias. Au Mali, le renouvellement indéfini des mandats présidentiels et la suspension des élections violent le droit de chaque citoyen de participer aux affaires publiques. En Iran, les autorités auraient arrêté des centaines de personnes, y compris des minorités, sur la base d'accusations vagues de collaboration ou d'espionnage. À travers le monde, de la Chine à la Turquie et au Venezuela, l'espace civique est restreint, la dissidence est réduite au silence et les manifestations pacifiques sont réprimées. Un cas significatif est celui de la région administrative spéciale de Hong Kong, où les pouvoirs étendus de la sécurité nationale utilisés contre la société civile et les défenseurs des droits humains ont fortement réduit la vitalité d'un espace public ouvert et libre. Les autorités ont utilisé une force excessive contre les manifestants en Indonésie, au Kenya, au Togo et ailleurs. La liberté des médias recule et les défenseurs des droits humains sont criminalisés de l'Égypte à la Fédération de Russie. Le rapport sur l'état de droit de 2025 de la Commission européenne observe que l'espace civique se réduit dans plusieurs États membres de l'Union européenne. Certains restreignent les manifestations pacifiques et d'autres imposent des restrictions qui limitent le travail des ONG. Les lois récemment adoptées en Équateur pourraient réduire la responsabilité des forces de l'ordre, étendre les pouvoirs des services de renseignement et restreindre l'espace civique. Les attaques contre la Cour constitutionnelle sont inacceptables. La loi d'amnistie adoptée le mois dernier au Pérou constitue un recul pour la justice et la vérité. Les réponses brutales ne font que provoquer plus de désaffection, de tension et de violence. Excellencies, international human rights law protects all, including the most vulnerable. Yet, attacks on minorities of all kinds are growing as states roll back commitments to tackle and prevent discrimination. Excessive use of force and deaths of people of African descent at the hands of law enforcement persist in many states, often rooted in systemic racism. Indigenous peoples continue to be denied their rights to land and to free, prior and informed consent in mining and other commercial projects. Violations against Roma are widespread in several European countries and beyond, including police violence, hate speech, and systemic exclusion in health, education, and housing. Representation of Roma in the European Parliament has shrunk to zero. In China, the progress we have sought for the protection of the rights of Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in Xinjiang, as well as Tibetans in their regions, has yet to materialize. This is a priority for my office's engagement. Restrictions of the rights of LGBTQ+ people are growing in West Africa, where some countries have adopted or are considering laws that criminalize consensual same-sex relations. In the United Kingdom, people with disabilities will be disproportionately affected by planned cuts to health benefits. In Argentina, austerity measures are having the greatest impact on people with disabilities and older people. Several countries around the world are cutting crucial programs that protect women's rights, including support for survivors of violence and access to sexual and reproductive health care. Maternal mortality is a leading killer of the most marginalized women and girls. This is a tragedy because it is largely preventable. Afghanistan, where women's access to health care, among many other human rights, is severely restricted, has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world. 4 years after the return of the Taliban, the erasure of women and girls from public life is almost complete. Policies and practices that violate the rights of migrants and refugees are becoming normalized in some countries. Pakistan and Iran have forcibly returned millions of Afghans to their country, and India has also deported groups of Rohingya Muslims by land and sea. I'm also concerned about recent measures taken by Germany, Greece, Hungary, and other European countries to limit the right to seek asylum. The United States has reportedly reached agreement with several governments, including El Salvador, South Sudan, Eswatini, and Rwanda, on deporting third-country nationals to places other than their homeland, raising concerns about compliance with international law. Kuwait has revoked the citizenship of thousands of people in recent years, leaving many stateless. In Cambodia, changes to the constitution and nationality law allow the authorities to remove citizenship in cases of treason, creating further ways for them to target their critics. In a positive development, North Macedonia has resolved all known cases of statelessness since the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia, the first country in the region to do so. Excellencies, our human rights mechanisms, including this Council, are a force field that protects people against unrestrained power. They warn us of potential harm to come, and we need to heed those warnings. Hate speech is a sign of rising tensions that can lead to violence. Around the world, we witness growing anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, racism, and large-scale disinformation campaigns. In Chad, Nigeria, and other countries in the region, conflicts between herders and farmers are aggravated by hateful narratives, escalating to deadly clashes. From South Sudan to Syria, hate speech compounds tensions and widens divisions. The lies and nihilism that fragment societies online translate into real attacks on real people. In Cambodia and Thailand, for example, social media vitriol has been a factor in today's tensions. In Spain, online media were weaponized to instigate physical violence against migrants. In Serbia, online hate speech often goes unpunished. Civic space is rapidly shrinking, with dissent stigmatized, protesters and independent journalists targeted, and the use of excessive force by the police. I reiterate my call for restraint, dialogue, and accountability. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, deliberately divisive narratives and historical revisionism continue to undermine peace and reconciliation. In the context of decades of dehumanization of the other, I welcome the recent initialing of a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This is an important step towards upholding and advancing human rights, reconciliation, healing, and lasting peace. We are ready to support both countries in this process. Freedom of expression is fundamental, but it does not protect those who use speech to spur violence and hatred. A growing number of leaders are now instrumentalizing freedom of expression to cover their own speech while silencing those who disagree. This must be called out each and every time. My office engages with national authorities, leaders, and media to develop strategies to define and counter incitement to hatred. Elections are a litmus test for government's commitment to freedom of expression and assembly and the rule of law. Here, too, our human rights monitoring raises the alarm and helps to prevent violations. My office has been following preparations for upcoming elections in Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Malawi, Tanzania, and Uganda. I'm deeply troubled that in many of these countries, the authorities are resorting to harassment, exclusion or detention of opposition leaders, restrictions on media freedom, bans on peaceful protest, and crackdowns on human rights defenders. Such actions, coupled with disinformation campaigns and hate speech, could feed tensions, polarization, and violence. I urge the authorities in these countries to reverse course immediately. Ahead of next year's election in Ethiopia, I am concerned about arbitrary detention of journalists and recent laws that may restrict freedom of association and expression. Against a backdrop of conflict in several regions, the Ethiopian authorities need to ensure conditions for fair, free, and inclusive elections. I welcome the agreement for my office to establish a new presence in Bangladesh to support the transition process there. Excellencies, peace and security depend on full respect for human rights everywhere. When the Security Council, the General Assembly, this Council, or other intergovernmental institutions discuss the human rights situation in a particular country, it is because this concerns us all in every country. The United Nations Charter gave birth to a new geopolitical era by enshrining the sovereign equality of states. National sovereignty is the foundation of multilateral institutions and international law. When states sign international agreements, they are exercising their national sovereignty, not limiting it. And with that sovereignty comes responsibility. Sovereignty does not mean ownership of people. All governments have a duty to treat all their people, including their political opponents, fairly, to protect them from harm and to respect their fundamental human rights. When they abandon that responsibility, it affects us all. Multilateral conventions and agreements have won incredible support over the past 8 decades and continue to do so today. As sovereign states sign up to them, they guarantee greater freedom and protection for their people. Bhutan, Cameroon, Eritrea, and Lebanon recently ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Dominica ratified the Convention Against Torture, and Bangladesh ratified its optional protocol. Malaysia and Vietnam have abolished the use of the death penalty for certain crimes, and I'm pleased to report that some member states are increasing their engagement with special rapporteurs and treaty bodies. Cuba, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Dominica, Guatemala, Iceland, Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, Singapore, Suriname, and Zambia recently accepted visits by special procedures mandate holders after more than 5 years. Libya recently accepted the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court for alleged crimes committed between 2011 and 2027. These are not empty gestures. They are tangible acts of leadership and responsibility. They confirm that the international system benefits states and their people in concrete and specific ways. When sovereign states fail to uphold perpetrators of the gravest crimes to account, it is important that others are able to step in through the principle of universal jurisdiction exercised in accordance with international law. For example, in Germany, a Syrian colonel of the former regime was sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes against humanity that took place in Syria, and a court in the Netherlands convicted a corporate executive for complicity in war crimes in Guinea and Liberia. And a federal court in the United States convicted a Gambian national on charges of torture. Within sovereign states, stakeholders beyond the government can also step up for human rights. I'm very encouraged by the growing number of cities and regions that are integrating human rights into urban governance. Cities have long been cradles of diversity and freedom, values that test authoritarian rule. Our recent guidelines set out exactly what cities and regions can do to protect their people and their rights. National human rights institutions are another important defense against discrimination, abuse, and the erosion of the rule of law. For example, the NHRI in South Africa is taking legal action to address hate speech. The NHRI in the Philippines has highlighted the impact of fossil fuels on the human rights of marginalized groups. Support for the independence and effectiveness of these national institutions is crucial. Civil society and social movements often drive transformational change, from anti-racism and feminism to climate activism. They are natural partners of my office, and we intend to work more closely together in the future. Philanthropists are key partners to help achieve positive change on the ground. I encourage them to collaborate and amplify their influence. The human rights and humanitarian communities find common ground in protecting civilians from the impact of conflict and crisis, and we must do more to strengthen this essential partnership. Señor Presidente, la educación en materia de derechos humanos es una de las herramientas e inversiones más importantes que tenemos para promover la libertad, evitar la discriminación y fomentar la cohesión. Me congratulo por el compromiso y el progreso de algunos Estados miembros. Desde Guyana hasta Mongolia, pasando por Oriente Medio y Sudáfrica, estamos apoyando esfuerzos para desarrollar planes de estudio sobre derechos humanos, amplificar las voces de los jóvenes y promover la participación cívica. Pero debemos hacer mucho más. Cada niño o niña, ya sea que en el futuro se dedique a la agricultura, al trabajo digital, a la medicina o al comercio, debería saber que los derechos humanos son nuestro derecho desde el nacimiento y nos conciernen a todos y todas. Hago un llamado a cada Estado miembro para que tome medidas y comparta el próximo año, durante la sesión número 63 del Consejo, su estrategia para garantizar que su población aprenda sobre los derechos humanos a lo largo de toda su vida. Mr. President, as my update shows, there are coordinated efforts to undermine human rights and the rule of law around the world. When states cut ties with the system or try to weaken it, when they isolate themselves, everybody loses. In response, we need a cross-regional movement to defend the international system. That is the only viable path to reach collective solutions to the existential threats we face today. Therefore, I hope to work with you on a new initiative through an alliance of member states, philanthropists, civil society, and others to strengthen the human rights ecosystem and join the dots between abuses and violations and crisis prevention. This will contribute to achieving the goal of the Secretary General's UN 80 initiative to improve coordination and to deliver better for the people we serve. We are working to convene this alliance on several fronts. First, we will enhance our engagement with all governments, even in the face of fierce disagreement, encouraging frank exchanges and keeping dialogue open. What gives me hope is that the vast majority of people around the world are crying out for human rights and freedoms. Second, we will reinforce the value of human rights to every citizen and every government through positive narratives and creative outreach. Third, we will harness innovation for human rights, including AI, by strengthening our partnerships with tech companies, academics, civil society, and more. Fourth, we will develop and grow support for the human rights economy together with our partners. And fifth, with your support, we will bolster sustainable funding for human rights work by identifying new avenues and models. Because history has shown time and again that no one is safe when human rights are under attack. Abuses committed against one group are always part of a broader pattern of oppression and lead to the wider erosion of fundamental freedoms. Human rights are meant to challenge our assumptions, to identify the blind spots, and encourage self-critical reflection, because no one is perfect. Our human rights mechanisms are one of the only parts of the multilateral system that has teeth. I encourage you to use them. Engaging with my office and the human rights system as a whole is valuable not for engagement's sake, but to achieve tangible progress for people everywhere. Together, we must refuse to back down in the face of discrimination, distortion, and lies. Together, we need to safeguard 80 years of progress on freedom, equality, and justice. Thank you.